This is second in a series that I'm doing on the adventures of Tintin, where I'm looking at each of the 24 adventures individually and talking about my own experience with them and pointing out a number of things that I've found particularly interesting or fascinating about each of the books in the series and how they relate to one another, and also the impact that these books and Hergé's art in general have had on me as a cartoonist and on my own work. And so we're going to look at Tintin in the Congo, which like the first volume, In the Land of the Soviets, has never had a proper American English language release. It has been released in Great Britain in an English language edition, and that's the one that we're going to look at here. But for reasons that'll become immediately obvious when we start looking at it, it has so far hasn't been considered appropriate as a release for, these are typically marketed as kids comics, and because of the crude nature of the book, but especially because of the racist material, it's never had an official American release. This here is probably the only thing that could count as an American release. This is a facsimile edition of the original collected book version of it that was published in French by Casterman. Casterman was the publisher who originally and still does release the Tintin comics in book form. They would have been serialized in the child supplement of a newspaper that Hergé was working for, and then collected in book form, originally in black and white, and this is a facsimile of that. These facsimile editions are distributed in this country by Last Gasp, and so that's how I got a hold of this. And you can see that, just taking a look at, I really like the end papers on these editions. Just taking a look at it, it's very similar to what we saw in the Land of the Soviets. The drawing is not much advanced from that volume. Still the 3-tier grid that he used originally before he went to smaller panels, smaller tiers, like more of a 4-tier grid size. And these black and white editions, when they were first collected in hardcover, Hergé drew a number of full panel color plates that were included with them. So, for instance, there's one, and there's another. Some of them are kind of nice. Yeah, that one. But then years later, so this came out in 1931, I think. In the 40s, Hergé redrew a lot of his early books, and he redrew Tintin in the Congo, and we're going to be looking at that version of the book. As I said, in the English language edition that is put out by Egmont, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, if that's the right way to pronounce it. So, just looking at the covers, they're pretty similar. This is a redrawing, though. There's some differences. The gasoline can is missing there. So he did redraw the cover, but again, pretty much sticking to pretty close to the original art, at least for these color plates, and for the cover. The story itself is much better drawn than the 1931 edition. So let's just jump in. So as I said, one of the reasons why this never had an American release like the other 22 volumes that follow is the material is kind of troubling. Well, not kind of troubling, considerably troubling. As I mentioned last time, Hergé was an artist, a cartoonist for a newspaper which was very, it was a Belgian Roman Catholic newspaper. It had a very strong political voice to it. It was very anti-communist and very nationalistic. And the Congo was still a colony of Belgium at that time. And so the sort of this paternal kind of attitude really comes through in the depiction of the Congolese people. Besides the fact that they're drawn in a very racist, stereotyped way, the way Tintin has them written, their dialogue, he shows them being very childlike, and it's just it's kind of a troubling thing to read all around, especially in this day and age, even back then, So we start in, and again, we see Tintin on in his role as reporter. And as I mentioned in the first episode, we don't really see later on Tintin acting in his job as reporter very much. But in these first two volumes, that's his job. He's going out on these adventures, acting as a reporter. In the original black and white, I think it was very explicit that Tintin was a reporter for Le Petit 21, which is the children's supplement of the Le 21 siècle, which is the newspaper that Hergé worked for. When it was redrawn, I think there was an effort to kind of downplay his not so much as being Belgian, but making him more general. So you don't hear so much about it being Brussels, where he's based, or that he's working for that particular newspaper anymore. And here we have he's being seen off by a group of children, including a Boy Scout here. So Hergé was heavily involved in the Scouts when he was younger. And Tintin kind of began as a Boy Scout kind of character. Sort of the proto-Tintin character that Hergé created, Totor, was actually a scout. And when he redrew the scene, he did something that he would start to do in many of the Tintin volumes. He would insert himself and some of his collaborators in a panel here and there. And here we see there's Hergé himself, and behind him was his main collaborator at the time, his first big assistant collaborator, Edgar P. Jacobs, who went on to do a famous series called Blake and Mortimer. And I believe, although I'm not sure, I think this was another one of his the people that he worked with. This might be Jacques Martin. I'll have to check. I haven't been able to find out for sure, but this drawing at least doesn't look like a general character that he would have thrown in there. It looks too much like an actual person. And a couple other things in this panel. There's a lot going on in this panel. Right here and here, two of the kids we see were, these are characters of another strip that Hergé was doing alongside Tintin back in the early days of the book, called Quick and Flupke. And they were sort of like street urchins who would get into trouble. And that's who these two here are. And then over here, we see two characters that become really part of the main cast later on. But at this point, they haven't been seen yet. And in fact, Tintin doesn't really meet them or come into contact with them until Cigars of the Pharaoh, which is a few volumes from here. But when Hergé was redrawing these, he felt compelled to insert some of the characters that his readers had come to be familiar with and just sort of throw them in here and there as sort of a treat to the readers. So here we see the detectives. They're not even named at this point, but it's obvious. It's them, Thompson and Thompson. And they're just observing this young reporter going off to Africa. This is also a bit of the kind of the retro fooling around with the chronology of the books that I mentioned in the first episode. We don't really, they really aren't introduced into a later volume, but now they've appeared in this earlier volume in the redrawing. So the art here is much, much, much better than the black and white version. There you can see, I mean, this is more than 10 years on, 15 years later, he redrew this, and he was a much better artist. And there is some inconsistency in the art here. It does look like some of the pages are a little bit older than others. So I wonder if he went back and he continued to redraw some of the sequences. In fact, I know he did one, we'll see it later, for a Scandinavian edition, I think a Norwegian edition. And I'm wondering if he did that with other sequences or pages as editions were released in other countries. He took that opportunity to go back and redraw them. There's Snowy is being seen off by his own crowd of admirers. And so we're on board the ship, and Snowy has his first scrape with another animal. This kind of happens a lot. I really like these these old-fashioned sight lines, the dotted line. We don't see a lot of these old cartooning conventions anymore, but I enjoy them. This one perhaps is, outlived its usefulness. And here we have our first instance of the way that Hergé was drawing black folks. What can you say? That's very typical of the time, I guess, but you can't imagine anybody doing this nowadays. Yes, again. And here they arrive in Africa, and they're greeted by a crowd, and the racist way that these people are drawn, and Tintin, of course, is being celebrated as kind of like the white savior. Like a lot of the drawing, the chairs, sort of a modernist style. A lot of the furniture in these books are quite nice. Okay, so here So here Tintin is being approached by people from newspapers, the New York Evening Post, the London Daily, and they're offering him large sums to get exclusives on his adventures, and he says he's already committed to other papers, and I've given them an exclusive on my reports. Again, we don't name Le 21 siècle in particular anymore. So you know, Tintin is much more, is trying to be much more universal, or shown as being much more universal or general. And just like in the Land of the Soviets, this adventure is kind of one gag after another, and many of the gags involve animals. And the way that Tintin deals with these various ordeals, for instance, we have a crocodile, is kind of bizarre to read nowadays, and sort of startling in the sort of brutal way that he handles the animals, and absurd too. Here's one sequence here where an antelope sticks his head up, and Tintin shoots it, and then he sees the head is still there, and he doesn't understand, thought he got it, shoots it again, still there, bang, again, bang, bang, bang. He goes over and he finds that he's slaughtered a whole pile of antelopes, just sort of in a casual way, this slaughtering of animals. And then here we have him shooting, he calls it a monkey, but it's not a monkey. It looks more like a chimpanzee maybe. And so he shoots it, and then somehow he skins it, and then he climbs into its skin and uses the skin as a disguise. Again, like a really, really bizarre and kind of disturbing thing. All right, not a lot of trains, planes, and automobiles in this volume, but we do have a few. So a train comes along, and it looks more like the kind of train you might find in an amusement park, and wrecks into his car, and of course it completely destroys the train, and the car looks fine. And all the poor Africans, and just the way Tintin draws them here, and they're sort of, you know, taking bits and pieces of Western style dress. A lot of them, he shows them being very much into uniforms, the broken sword, cuffs and collar, and Tintin is trying to get them to all pitch in to help right the engine, and nobody wants to do it, and he scolds them for being lazy, and finally gets the thing back on the tracks and hooks up his car to it and pulls them along to the next station. Again, a very, you know, troubling depiction of Africans. Here he comes to a local king, and more encounters with wildlife. I kind of like this scene. The lion has just picked him up by the rear end. Although, so Snowy gets a hold of the lion's tail, and the lion is trying to whip him around to get him off his tail, and finally bonks Snowy on a tree, and the tail has come off. So again, this is just really weird and kind of disturbing. I mean, the whole thing is disturbing, the way he shows the people. The way he has them talking in this kind of pidgin English, which I suppose in the French language edition would have been done in a similar way. the translators, they tried to capture the spirit of the dialogue rather than doing a more of a direct translation. And here he's becoming involved in a war between these two feuding local kings. Again, the bits and pieces of Western military, one of those shako hats. And this looks like some sort of infantry helmet. There's another sequence with an animal. So Snowy is swallowed by this snake and begins ripping his way out. His feet pop out first. The snake doesn't know what's going on. He's like, how extraordinary. It's the first time I've noticed I have paws. And he begins walking away. And then Tintin takes out his trusty pocket knife and begins cutting Snowy out of the snake. And if that isn't enough, he takes the tail of the snake and sticks it in its mouth, and it begins swallowing itself. I mean, just really bizarre. So that's what these early adventures were like. They were kind of a gag a page, very fast-paced, non-stop action. This would change over the course of the series. His writing would mature, the stories would mature along with the artwork, and we would have much more realistic situations than the sort of outlandish stuff. Here's a sequence here that was changed from the original black and white edition. In the original, Tintin is lecturing the school children on their colonial fatherland, Belgium, and giving them a lesson in, I don't know, geography or history or something. And when they went to redo it for the color edition, they changed it wisely into a math lesson. And here we have a leopard invading the classroom. And so Tintin throws a sponge into its mouth, which it swallows. Then he spills the bucket of water on the floor, and the sponge in the leopard's belly begins absorbing the water until he's bloated enough for Tintin to be able to kick him out the door. This is kind of a nice page. You don't see, you see what I mean about the change to the four-tier grid of panels. And you don't see these large panels that much in the Tintin books. These are kind of nice, though. Although this is really, the way his head is drawn here is really off model. Every time I see this panel, I get stuck on his head. And why didn't he catch that? I mean, Hergé was pretty good at getting Tintin down at this point, at least, you know. Okay, not a whole lot to say about this, other than the criticisms. The drawings is okay. You know, the redrawn version is all right. Some panels are nice, but overall, it's not a great read. The story isn't particularly interesting. I'd say if you're going to read all of the books, you really don't need to read these first two. You wouldn't miss anything if you never read them. They really don't add anything to the overall Tintin arc, if there is one. I mean, a lot of these, I don't think any of these characters recur, and none of the villains. A lot of times he'll bring the villains back into other stories. I don't think we see this guy again. He's sort of a forgettable villain. Yeah, and just more animal gag sequences, kind of hokey solutions to the situation. He shows the leopard a mirror and it frightens him away. He's trying to take a picture of these giraffes and he rigs up a giraffe suit to get close to them. Now here's the one, so we're getting towards the end here. This is the one sequence that I wanted to compare to an earlier version of it. So when Tintin drew it in color, originally it was this, where he drills a hole while hanging above a rhino and sticks a stick of dynamite in it and then blows the rhino up. And I don't know, the sequence is just, in my mind, is just as absurd and brutal as any of the others in the book, but for some reason he decided to redo this one. It was too much. And so for the Norwegian edition, which is included in this English language edition, instead of blowing up the rhino, he has the rhino become startled by the rifle and runs away. And it's notable because the artwork on this page alone is clearly from his later. I mean, you look at that Tintin there, and it's very much how he would draw him in the later volumes. And although he's still trying to mimic the simple look of this volume, it's if you're looking for it, you can see these differences in the artwork. Yeah, we managed to fit in at least one airplane into this volume. And then we come to the end, and the African villagers are remembering their visit from Tintin fondly, and it's another interesting panel. We don't get these big aerial views very often. He does a few in later volumes. He does them really well. This isn't a very good one, but here we have, they've treating them very childlike still, and okay, in a very insulting way, really. And here they've set up an idol of Tintin and Snowy, and even the dogs are remembering Snowy fondly. Tintin and Snowy is the white savior that came among them. So, yeah, I don't know, not a whole lot to say about, not a whole lot good to say about Tintin in the Congo. One word, though, about these. So this is, as I said, this is a British edition, and this is the kind of hardcover that you find in most of the European editions. For some reason, the American editions were not put out in these nice hardcover editions. I don't know why. Maybe it was thought Americans wouldn't want to spend the money on something like this, or it was a waste of money to make something this nice for a kid's comic. I don't know. But whenever I got my hands on these as a kid, I remember thinking these are so much better, especially for the end papers inside. I always loved these. This is sort of many of the characters that appear in all of the volumes, and sort of as a wall of portraits. And I just thought that this was always so well done. I sit here and I try to identify all of them and see if I could remember which volume they came from, or even if I could remember their names. Not all of them were named in the stories. But that, and it's different too. I mean, he really put the work into making these nice. This is different. You get two different sets of end papers. Yeah. Okay. That's Tintin in the Congo.